Very powerful words. And Luke shapes it in a more detailed way that speaks of an interesting quality. It speaks of this Roman centurion who was in the land of the Hebrews because Rome was in charge. Some would say oppressing that country. So we often think of these stories when Jesus or the Gospels refer to this occupying army as great enemies. And this story gives us a significant twist to the plot. After Jesus had finished all his teachings in the hearing of the people, he entered the town of Capernaum. A centurion there had a servant whom he valued highly, and who was ill and close to death. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to Jesus, asking him to come and heal the servant. When they came to Jesus, they appealed to him earnestly, saying, "He, the centurion, is worthy of having you do this for him, for he loves our people, and it is he who built our synagogue for us." And Jesus went with them. But when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends forward to say to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore I did not presume to come to you. But only speak the word, and let my servant be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me. I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes. And to another, 'Come,' and he comes. And to my servant, 'Do this,' and the servant does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed, and he turned to the crowd that followed him. He said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." When those who had been sent returned to the centurion's house, they found the servant in good health. So here this marvelous story speaks to us of the power of faith. But it also speaks to us in this version of the power of consideration and goodwill that this centurion had for the people that, yes, he was ruling and overseeing. But he provided for their needs by building them a synagogue in which they could worship their way. And by his open-heartedness, he was able to be aware of Jesus of Nazareth and the power that he possessed. And he knew that Jesus commanded the truth of spirit, and that he did not have to come to the centurion's house, but if he would just declare the truth for that servant, the servant would be healed, and was. Today is a time that our country recognizes Memorial Day. Now, Memorial Day in our history back in the 19th century has a complex history. And just like the stories in the Gospels are told slightly differently in the different Gospels, so the story of Memorial Day in the United States is told differently or claimed by different cities and towns. As many of you know, I ministered for many years in Syracuse, New York, and one Memorial Day I was taking my elderly mother for a ride through the state to see the beautiful countryside, and we came to the town of Waterloo, New York. And it was Monday, Memorial Day. And we were driving through the town, and there were parades and fanfare and carrying on, and we thought, well, I wonder what they're celebrating. So we stopped to investigate. They were celebrating Memorial Day their way, and they had a very special claim, because in 1966, President Johnson gave an order to recognize that Waterloo, New York, was the birthplace of the celebration of Memorial Day. So here we had accidentally happened right into the experience, right where it began as our civil celebration and day of remembrance. The little twist to the story is that there are a few other towns in the United States that claim they are the birthplace of Memorial Day as well, but we won't let that ruin our story. Memorial Day, a time when we recognize those who have passed on. It's long been associated with veterans and those who have served and not come home from various wars throughout our history, really beginning with the Civil War. The folks in Waterloo, New York had noticed that in just a few years after the Civil War, many of the graves of the soldiers were being forgotten. And so it was an attempt to remember and honor them by cleaning and decorating their graves. And hence, many of us are old enough that besides the tradition of white clothes, we remember the time when Memorial Day was more commonly called Decoration Day. And of course, it's not limited to those who have served in military service, but also many people go to family and friends' graves to decorate them with flowers and to honor them. And this is a good and special thing in remembrance. We all have different ways that we enact our memories. Today, my lesson is entitled Bringing the Past into the Present. We can do that many different ways, and there can be many different results. Today, I want to call to our awareness two aspects of remembering. What it is to remember. These may seem like obvious distinctions or perhaps an oversimplification on my part, but I believe it's an important practice, our spiritual practice, of how we create our perspective on the past so that it is helpful to our present day experience. In the act of recalling past events, circumstances, and perhaps most of all, relationships with friends and family that are no longer physically present, we can actually create one or two possible scenarios. We can place our thinking and feeling in the past and inwardly relive or recreate past experiences and feelings. Or we can bring the past into the present by focusing on the way that past events and relationships have shaped our life today. From just the tiniest details. I was recalling this morning in our prayer service, the background music that I was using was from an artist in Canada who came to my ministry in Syracuse, New York on a couple of occasions, and he had his whole orchestra of great brass gongs, crystal bowls, and all kinds of sound-producing instruments. And he created these wonderful, inspiring concerts of sound. And it just made me recognize, just this very moment, or this very morning, those of us in the prayer service had the benefit of his creative music through the recording that he gave me. So he was in my past, not physically here, In his case, he is still alive, but still in my past. But he did something by actually giving me, I didn't purchase it, he gave me the gift of his music to use however I saw fit in ministry. And so here this very morning I had the consequence of the beautiful sound shaping our experience by his act in the past. So my example of our two options, I can reflect on what it was to work with him in the ministry back in New York State, and I can throw myself back into the past, relive it, but from a standpoint and an awareness that it no longer is. Sort of throwing myself into the past. Or I have the option on reflecting the gift and the experience of this present day that was only possible for me because of what he did for me in the past. So living in my gratitude and appreciation and awareness of what shaped this morning's prayer service by his kind gift in the past. Perhaps I could share that music. I could do something with it. A further distinction in these two options of whether we put ourselves in the past or we draw the past into an awareness of the present gift in our life is that when we're simply in reflection in the past, we can't do anything. We can only remember it, re-experience the feelings, and that might have its place, but we can't do anything with that. Whereas when we bring the past into our present day experience and say, look, how those good souls, what they did for my life story that has shaped even today, I can do something with that. It's a living seed that can make a difference now. I'll give you another example, not just to dwell on my family story, but it's a powerful example for me. My father so cherished his medical education at the University of Missouri back in the 1940s that a number of years ago he wanted to establish a scholarship for the first-year students in medicine at the University of Missouri. And so he set that up. And now, more than 20 years later, at my last accounting from the university, 45 students have begun medical school in Columbia because of his gift, and my mother's as well. They're no longer living, but their gift and their deed continues giving. That gift that keeps on giving. Well, we can find evidence in our lives of relationships and events in our past that are still present today. But if we go looking for them physically, then we find ourselves in a place of hopelessness because these friends and family aren't physically present. But if we seek their presence in our life today, in the difference and the gift that they made for our life story, our biography, then they become a very living presence, and a presence that we can continue. I don't know how many times I turn in a time of frustration or quandary, and suddenly I think, and sometimes I even speak, to my late father How would you handle this? And I began to think of the ways that he modeled integrity, goodwill, honesty within his work and his community, and how I can pick that up and use it today in my life. I can do something with it. It's a living soul treasure. And I might not have developed it or even been conscious of it had it not been for what he modeled during his life for me. And of course, for each one of us, we have lives filled with the prosperity of these treasures, of these possibilities. And, of course, some of us have stories, relationships, encounters, careers, circumstances that weren't always easy or pleasant. But even those had the capacity to shape us in terms of our strength, our endurance, our possibilities. I grew up for many years, or through many years, with my best friend in school. And he came from a family that was, how do I want to describe it? He was an only child, and his parents had a very unusual idea about what normal family life was like. Things could be quite difficult. And I watched as he got older, and we had both been off to school and a little bit later. And he found the woman that he married, and she had a couple of children. And I was talking to him about it, and I could tell that he wanted to shape a family life that was quite distinct from what he had grown up with. So in recalling, I can imagine for him that maybe some of the experiences in his growing up were not the most pleasant to recall, but I could see active in his mind. He was recalling them as examples of what patterns that he did not want to follow, and has since developed his family life with his wife and children in a way that was quite different from how he was raised. So whatever our biography or our life story is, whatever we've encountered on our few years or our many years along the path, it always has the possibility of bringing out something of a treasure in our soul, giving us tools of how we relate with one another, of our creative careers, of our paths. Now, we human beings do not like to be helpless. I remember as I worked at one point in graduate school in psychology, a particular experiment that was designed by some creative professor. And in that, individuals, usually students, you'd get the students to be the guinea pigs, were placed in rooms where there was a lot of annoying sound from outside. But they were given a brief instruction that if the noise bothered them, there was a switch to turn it off. And then in a little bit, they'd turn the switch, the sound would end, and then in a few minutes, that mischievous experimenter would turn the sound back on. And they'd flip the switch and turn it off. And this went on for a while, and then the experimenter did a change that he didn't tell them about, and he deactivated their switch. And now no matter how much they switched it, the annoying sound would not go off. They couldn't control it, and they became more frustrated. In the analysis of the experiment, it was described as learned helplessness. To learn that we didn't have any control over our situation. This really disturbs human beings when they have no sense of control or lose hope that anything will change. Well, I'd like to suggest our review of our memories, our recollections, if we place ourselves in the past and we only recall what now we use the cliche, back in the day, we only recall, I think in the past we used to call it the good old days, we only recall that, we have placed ourselves in the past, and it's a place where we cannot do, we can only remember or refeel. It's not a creative place, it is a place of learned helplessness. All we can do is repeat the story over and over and over again. Reminds me, if you're as old as I am or older, you might remember some of those mysterious television shows, The Twilight Zone, and where people would be stuck in a situation that just didn't change. Well, we are creative agents. We're created in the image and likeness of God with powers to co-create with Spirit our lives and our world. So we want to bring the past into the present in a way that is helpful, inspiring, uplifts us, develops us further. And I'd like to suggest that is when we recall past relationships, experiences, situations in our life, that we very quickly look at how is this shaping my life today? What have I learned through this experience that I might not have learned otherwise? I had an eye-opening experience of getting real or getting honest with myself. I went through those adolescent years, you remember those, and rebellious years when you think your parents have done everything wrong and they have ruined your life. And woe is me. And one day I had a revelation. I think it was Spirit knocking on my soul and saying, wake up. And the words or phrase just came to my mind regarding these situations of my adolescent years, and it rang out within me. I could have made other choices. Maybe this isn't about blaming my parents, or blaming the church I was raised in, or the school I attended. I could have made other choices. Like my friend who took a not an easy family upbringing and said, wow, this is a perfect model of what I don't want, and worked hard to create his family in another way. We too can look at that situation and say, I could have made other choices. But the secret is, we can change that phrase now to, I can still make new choices. I can look at this experience and rewrite the story of my life, what it means to me, where I go from here. That's always possible. Why? Because God created you to be a creative agent. Can you imagine if that were not true? Our lives would be fixed and chained to the past. We would all have learned helplessness. But we all have the opportunity to reshape that story and say, what is the inner capacity What have I learned through this experience that I can continue to develop as I focus my attention on it? So today, for our time of meditation, I'd like to lead into our time of silence with these words that Christ spoke through Jesus, recorded in the Gospel of John. In the world, you have tribulation, perhaps distress and suffering. But be courageous, be confident, be undaunted, be filled with joy, for I, the Spirit within you, has overcome the world. The Spirit within transforms your story and your world. So I invite you to become comfortable, to close your eyes, and just allow your attention to turn within to the whole story of your life. And to allow some event, some circumstance, particular relationship with another, to come before your mind's eye. When you have that in the center of imagination within your mind, within your feeling heart, imagine how you might have experienced that differently. How you might have experienced that in a way that strengthens, empowers, takes you from helplessness to hopefulness. And now whatever that alternate story is that you have created in your imagination, you can return to this time and place and to know that that creative alternate story is something that you can carry now in your present day, and let it be a guide for how you relate to this day, to others in your life, of how that past situation shaped, taught, and developed you as a human being. So I invite you to allow your attention now to come back to this room in which you're seated. And I want to leave you with this call to action. That's another way of saying what we heard in school, homework. A challenge for you to take into the week, to just give some time this week in which our country celebrates Memorial Day tomorrow, and give some time, even if it's only 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be an involved exercise of many hours. Just some time of reflection, perhaps at the end of your day, and to consider, what are you memorializing in your life? What are you memorializing? Making fixed in your memory of your life story. Sometimes we fix hard markers in our life, sort of like the tombstones that many of us will see on Memorial Day. They're fixed versions of the past. But there's something else that we do on Memorial Day. That is, we place beautiful flowers upon the grave. And flowers are living and beautiful, and they bloom and evolve. So when you look back on your life, you can have those rigid stone markers, or you can think of those flowers on Memorial Day placed on the grave. That those individuals that you are remembering brought you gifts, experiences that are like those blooming flowers. They're continuing to develop in your life, no matter how many years in a historical sense have gone by. There are those family, relatives, co-workers no longer physically present, but their deeds in your life are still living with you. So just take some time to reflect. What am I memorializing? Am I rehearsing the past over and over? Or am I looking today for the gifts I have because of the past? And so it is. Let's